his legislation in, the official said. The Seashore's Advisory Commission, the first in the country, has since been replicated, Lyons said. All these citizen advisory committees are facing the same fate. It's a very unfortunate thing, she said. Specific to the Seashore Commission is an issue in North Truro with a private campground next to park property, Newendell said. Illegal tree cutting has gone on, and there may be new forms of camping that need to be understood, he said. With a 15-month break, you kind of lose track of what had happened, he said. In December 2016, the Advisory Commission voted unanimously to recommend that the Seashore let a business permit for Horton's Camping Resort at 67 South Highland Road in North Truro lapse. Then Seashore Superintendent George Price did as recommended, but that primarily means the campground is no longer protected from possible condemnation, but may remain open. Advisory Commission members had blasted the campground's owner for clearing land to install sewer pipes, which occurred earlier that year and prompted Truro officials to issue a stop work order. The campground company is currently fighting the order in Barnstable Superior Court. Marconi Stairs to be repaired by the weekend, by Mary Ann Bragg, South Wellfleet. Cape Cod National Seashore officials plan to reopen the parking lot at Marconi Beach by the weekend after it was closed so repairs could be made to stairs to the beach, Seashore Superintendent Brian Carlstrom said. The Seashore closed the beach parking lot after the sand at the bottom of the stairs was washed away from the last two high tides, Carlstrom said Tuesday. The stairs are the only way for beachgoers to reach the water's edge from the parking lot on the bluff above. Earlier this year, the Seashore spent $180,000 repairing winter storm damage to the stairs, which were reopened on June 28th. We are anticipating having to replace them every 2 or 3 years, Carlstrom said. While a new footpath has replaced wooden stairs at Nauset Lake Beach in North Eastham to the south, that is not an option at Marconi due to the height of the bluff and its distance along the coast, he said. Marconi Beach, off Route 6, has one of the largest beach parking lots on the Cape's eastern coastline at 528 spaces and is one of a handful of eastern coast beaches in the Seashore that have experienced damage to structures in recent years from winter storm surges and erosion.
Thank you for listening to the Massachusetts Reading Network, a window to independent life in your community from Cape Cod to the Berkshires.
Hi, this is volunteer reader Bob Kay, broadcasting from Springfield, Massachusetts. Stay tuned for more coming your way next.
WRRS Middleborough, Pittsfield, WVBF Middleborough, WDJM Framingham, WUML Lowell, WLLO Londonderry.
Coming up next from the Talking Information Center, it's the Senior Program, featuring a selection of articles from AARP magazine, as well as other sources. Please stay tuned.
Hello, listeners. This is the reading of the Senior Program for today. Find Your Sunshine. I'm reading from the articles published in the Arthritis Foundation for September. Make a list of mood boosters to brighten rough days. When Juliana Barry was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis 10 years ago, her grandmother gave her a jar filled with silly trinkets and slips of paper with inspiring messages. I could always count on it for a smile, she said. So when the jar was empty, she created her own version, a list of activities that make her happy. I call it my sunshine list, says Barry. When I'm having a rough time, I'll choose something to do, or my husband will suggest something from it. Having a list of mood boosters is a smart way to cope with arthritis pain, says Marnie M. Sellen, Ph.D., a clinical health psychologist based in Connecticut and New York. When you're hurting, it's tempting to withdraw, she said, but succumbing may make the pain worse. A fun activity can take your mind off it and brighten your outlook. Make your own sunshine list of items and activities that bring you joy. Include a mix of simple and more involved options. A few suggestions to consider. 1. Look at old photos. They can bring up a happy memory. Barry's favorites her digital pictures so she can stroll through them later. Seeing a picture of my dog always brightens my day, she said. 2, get some fresh air. Spending time in nature can ease stress and help you relax. Sometimes she drives to a nearby waterfall, but even if I only have a few minutes, I'll sit in my backyard. Work on a hobby. Whether it's painting, as Barry does, or some pastime, take time to do something you enjoy and think of ways to modify it during a flare. If you can't jog, try walking. Jot in a journal. Put your emotions on paper and list what you're thankful for. Feeling gratitude has been shown to reduce depression in people with arthritis. 5, read a favorite book. One of mine. Barry loads her favorites on a lightweight e-reader, which is easy to hold, then a book. I go back to my favorites because it feels like a warm hug, she said. 6, watch a funny show. Laughter triggers feel-good endorphins, which may help you handle pain. And last, reward yourself. For example, Barry says, after doctor's appointments, I buy myself flowers and listen to my specific playlist of music. I'm now reading from the Cleveland Clinic Arthritis Advisor of September 2018. Treat low back pain right. Low back pain is extremely common, but it is not always treated appropriately. Most adults in the United States experience low back pain at some point in their lives, but too many of them receive the wrong care, according to a series of articles published in The Lancet, March 2018. Wrong care. Low back pain really is a medical emergency, but yet studies show that people often go to the emergency department with acute episodes of back pain. One study found that about 60% of the people treated in an emergency department for back pain were prescribed an opioid, even though the opioids are discouraged for treating back pain. Imaging studies have a limited role during the early stages of back pain, yet more than half of people with low back pain receive an imaging study. People with back pain often are inappropriately told to rest and stop work. Only half of the people with low back pain are prescribed exercise, which is the most effective treatment. The problem is people with acute episodes of back pain often go to doctors who tell them the wrong things, and then the problem worsens because they wait too long to see the right doctor. They become deconditioned, and it's a downward spiral. What's causing the pain? A number of conditions can lead to low back pain, and specific causes it's often not identified, according to articles in that Lancet magazine. The complex array of structures in and around the spine means that there are several possible pain generators. The spine is more than just a stack of bones, vertebrae. There are conditioning discs between the vertebrae and small joints behind each vertebral body that it connects to the one above and below, the facet joints. The bones of the spine are supported by ligaments, tendons, and layers of large muscle that go from your head to your tailbone. They should help you stay erect and move around. As we age, the discs can degenerate and become thinner. Sometimes the soft center of the disc can push through the tough outer layer, causing a slipped or herniated disc. You can have osteoarthritis, the wearing down of the cartilage, in facet joints. Some people develop spinal stenosis, which is a narrowing of the spinal canal or a space where nerves exit the spinal canal. These may sound serious, but they don't always cause symptoms. And a herniated disc and a spinal stenosis are more likely to cause numbness, tingling, and pain down the leg than the lower back pain. This is because it is a pinching nerve that generates the symptoms. Nerves in the lower back extend down the legs. Osteoarthritis in facet joints may cause back pain. Most common causes. The reality is that most pain that is felt in the lower back actually comes from stress and strain on the muscles and other mechanical problems. People can spend too much time working in the garden, cleaning the house, lifting heavy objects, or otherwise overworking their bodies. The next day they can't move because of muscle spasms, and it has nothing to do with the structures of the spine, explains Dr. Rosenquist. Muscle pain can really feel severe. Unless back pain is caused by a major trauma or there are certain warning signs that something more serious is going on, treatment starts with simple measures, regardless of the cause. If the pain comes on suddenly and is accompanied by numbness, weakness, fever, or bowel or bladder dysfunction, see a physician right away. These are potential signs of fracture, compressed nerves, infection, or cancer. Initial treatment. If you hurt your back and don't have the red flags mentioned above, start by applying heat to soothe the muscles and ice to reduce the inflammation. Take it easy for a few days, but continue normal activity as much as possible. Prolonged bed rest is not recommended. You want to stretch and be as active as you can. If you just lie down, the muscles will get tighter and tighter. Just because you're in pain doesn't mean you need medication. If the pain doesn't go away in a week or two, then go to your primary care doctor, not the emergency department. Your doctor will most likely refer you to physical therapy. The most important treatment for low back pain is exercise to stretch and strengthen muscles in the abdomen, back, hips, and pelvis. Even if pain does go away, stretching and strengthening exercises are advised to keep it from coming back. The Lancet articles report that about 1/3 of the people with low back pain have recurring episodes. You should consider a first episode of back pain as a sign that it is time to start back strengthening programs. Pain medications. You might be given a medication, but not an opioid. We use the appropriate categories of drugs that target specific reasons for the pain, says Dr. Rosenquist. They should always be used unless you have a history of stomach ulcer or kidney disease. Those are Aleve, Advil, Motrin, and ibuprofen. Muscle relaxants such as cyclobenzaprine, Flexeril, can be used to calm down muscle spasms. If the pain originates from pinched nerves, drugs such as gabapentin, Neurontin, or amitriptyline, Elavil might be used. Opioid drugs such as hydrocodone, Vicodin, Lotrab, or oxycodone, Percocet, or OxyContin are very powerful painkillers, but they are not recommended for most cases of back pain. Opioids dull pain sensors, but they don't target underlying reasons for the pain. Adding that opioids have such a potential to be addicting. Time for an imaging study. If you are not better after about 6 weeks of trying these conservative methods, it might be time for an imaging study, starting with the X-ray. This may help identify the cause. But Dr. Rosenquist points out that degenerative changes in the spine, which may appear on an X-ray, occur normally with age, and they may or may not be a source of symptoms. Even when the symptoms stem from something like a herniated disc or spinal stenosis, initial treatment will be the same as described above. Conservative measures almost always come first. Dr. Rosenquist sometimes offers patients steroid injections to be used in conjunction with other measures. What people need to understand is that most of the time, a flare of back pain is not serious. It usually calms down in a week or two. And what you need to know: low back pain is common, but often treated incorrectly. Back pain is rarely an emergency. The exact cause of back pain can be difficult to pinpoint. Most low back pain stems from pulling a muscle or overstretching a ligament. Treat low back pain conservatively at first with ice, heat, activity modification, but not bed rest, and possibly a pain patch. The next step is physical therapy and possible pain medications, but not opioids. If pain persists, further evaluation and possibly an imaging study is warranted. That concludes that article. I'm now reading from the Icahn School of Medicine, a letter of September 2018. Self-help strategies can ease the discomfort of hemorrhoids. You're more likely to develop hemorrhoids as you age. The word hemorrhoid is actually a medical term for the cushions of tissue that surround blood vessels in your anal area. But what most of us would call hemorrhoids occur when the tissue prolapses through a sphincter muscle, exposing the delicate skin lining and rectum. Unfortunately, you become more vulnerable to hemorrhoids as you get older. In fact, they are one of the most common medical conditions in elderly population. However, they aren't dangerous, and they are strategies you can try to ease the discomfort they may cause. Constipation is a major cause. It isn't entirely clear what causes hemorrhoids, but there are some factors that increase your risk for developing them. Examples include obesity, extended time spent standing or sitting, and chronic constipation. The latter is a major risk factor for hemorrhoids since it tends to result in you straining to expel stool, explains Mount Sinai geriatrician Patricia Bloom, MD. The force of bearing down on subjects the veins in the rectal area to pressure that causes them to enlarge. Chronic constipation is common in seniors and can result from a poor diet, particularly low intake of fiber, limited fluids intake, and too little physical exercise. Health conditions like stroke, diabetes, Parkinson's disease, and underactive thyroid also make you more susceptible to constipation, as can certain medications. Diagnosing. The chief symptom of hemorrhoid is a bright red blood seen on a toilet tissue or in the toilet bowl. However, hemorrhoids may not be painful or otherwise noticeable unless they protrude through the anus, says Dr. Bloom. Excessive straining, rubbing, or cleaning around that area may cause irritation, bleeding, or itching, which starts a vicious cycle. Discomfort in the anal area and rectal bleeding can be due to a number of different causes, so mention these symptoms to your doctor. An examination of your anus and rectum will be conducted to look for swollen blood vessels. Your doctor may also look closely at the rectum with an anoscope, a lighted tube useful for viewing internal hemorrhoids, a proctoscope, which can be used to examine the entire rectum, or a sigmoidoscope to look at the rectum and lower colon. Sigoscopies require that you undergo a colon prep, which involves fasting and taking laxatives to ensure that your colon is clear. If you are age 50 or older and have not yet had a routine colonoscopy to screen for colorectal cancer, your doctor may suggest you have this test instead, since you will have to undergo the necessary colon prep. Self-help strategies. The primary recommendation for easing hemorrhoids is to boost your fiber intake and drink plenty of fluids, since this will help alleviate constipation. You can best increase your consumption of fiber by eating more fresh fruits and vegetables and choosing whole grains, whole wheat bread, brown rice over refined white grains. Also increase your physical activity levels. Avoid straining on the toilet, and if you take daily medications, ask your doctor whether any of them are known to cause constipation. Dr. Bloom advises a different drug or an adjustment in the dose might help. If these measures don't ease your constipation, Dr. Bloom suggests that you discuss with your doctor whether a short course of laxatives may help. If your hemorrhoids are causing discomfort, careful cleansing of the anal area daily and after each bowel movement should help. Warm baths or zit spots can be soothing, as you can use cold compresses on the area. Topical creams that include witch hazel or corticosteroids can relieve irritation, but you should avoid long-term use of the corticosteroid creams. Medical treatment. For second and third degree hemorrhoids, as well as first degree hemorrhoids that aren't helped by conservative therapy, your doctor may suggest a procedure to destroy the hemorrhoid tissue. Rubber band ligation, which involves tying off the hemorrhoid until it comes away from its own, generally agreed to be the most effective of the less invasive approaches, Dr. Bloom notes. However, it is more painful than any other method. The procedure can be performed in your doctor's office, but it is not suitable for people who take blood thinners such as warfarin, Coumadin, Pradaxa, Exalto, Eliquis, and Savasa. Other options include sclerotherapy, which is a solution is injected around the blood vessel to shrink the hemorrhoid, and infrared coagulation, in which a device is used to burn the hemorrhoid tissue. If non-surgical procedures are not effective, the hemorrhoids are particularly severe, or other conditions in the anal area warrant surgery, such as a tear, the swollen tissue may need to be surgically removed. However, only about 5 to 10% of the people need that surgery. That concludes that article. I'm now reading from the UCLA Healthy News. Hope, options, and cures for cancer. Researchers are making good progress with experimental immunotherapies for rare and difficult cancers. Outcomes might be far-reaching. Telling patients that their cancer could be cured as long as has been taboo in the oncology world. But in his remarks to the 2018 attendees of the American Society of Clinical Oncology annual meeting, Norman Shopless, MD, National Cancer Institute Director, said that this is changing. We are, in fact, curing patients right now, more than ever, including those with metastatic cancer, says Dr. Shopless. There is undoubtedly reason for carefully using the word, because we are dealing with an immensely complex disease that we still do not fully understand. But I contend that there are times to talk about curing cancer with patients and the public, because thanks to decades of progress in the cancer science, now we have hope, we have options, and sometimes we even have cures. Living longer with brain cancer. Extending survival for patients with glioblastoma, a rare form of brain cancer, is an outcome of a Phase 3 clinical trial led by researchers at UCLA. The study, which is still in progress, is the largest trial to date testing customized vaccine in patients diagnosed with a deadly brain cancer. The survival rate is quite remarkable compared to what would be expected of glioblastoma, says lead author Linda Liao, MD and chair of neurosurgery department at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. What's particularly impressive about immunotherapy trials is that there seems to be a population of about 20 to 30% of patients who are living significantly longer than expected. The long tail of the survival curve, and those are the people with whom we think there may be a particularly strong immune response against their cancer that is protecting them from getting tumor reoccurrences. Researchers at UCLA have spent almost 2 decades working to activate dendritic cells against brain cancer. Dendritic cells are a type of white blood cell that typically alerts the immune system when it detects a foreign invader. Dr. Liao and her team are the first to test the dendritic cell-based vaccine in patients with glioblastoma, a type of tumor that had previously been thought to be immune-privileged, meaning the immune system won't attack it. However, Dr. Liao and her colleagues demonstrated in previous studies that the body could mount an immune response against tumors in the brain following the vaccination. Therapeutic vaccines, checkpoint inhibitors, and adoptive cell transfers are some of the immunotherapy treatments used to stimulate the body's immune system to fight cancer. Trial treatment cures advanced breast cancer. Adoptive cell transfer, ACT, is an immunotherapy approach that has been effective in treating melanoma, which has a high level of mutations. However, it has been less effective with cancers that have lower levels of mutations, such as some of the common cancers that start in the lining of the organs, the stomach, the esophageal, the ovarian, and breast cancers. This past year, 49-year-old woman who participated in the Phase 2 of the clinical trials at NCI has made headway when a newly designed form of ACT led to complete regression of her metastatic breast cancer. To treat her, the researchers sequenced DNA and RNA from one of her tumors as well as normal tissue to see which mutations were unique to her cancer. The researchers then tested different tumor-infiltrating lymphocytes from the patient to find those that recognized one or more of the mutated proteins. The TILs were expanded and infused back into the patient. She was also given the checkpoint inhibitors pembrolizumab to prevent the possible inactivation of the infused T cells by the tumor. After the treatment, this patient's cancer disappeared and has not returned for more than 22 months. According to NIH researchers Tom Mistelli, the case highlights just how powerful immunotherapy can be. If the response is repeated in a larger study, it may be further extended the option of therapy to other cancers. Clinical trials, phases, and participation. It takes years of research before a drug or procedure makes it to the clinical trial stage. If it does, when they do reach that stage, those treatments or procedures are tested on people to refine them for use for the general public. Clinical trials are designed to answer questions about the safety and efficacy of drugs, vaccines, surgical procedures, devices, and other treatments. Trials follow a phased process, typically starting with small-scale studies involving just a few people to larger trials with more people. For example, the FDA defines drug trial phases as following. Phase 1 is when researchers test a new drug in normal volunteers, healthy people, or people with the disease conditions. Researchers closely monitor how the drug interacts with the human body, adjusts dosages, and evaluates side effects. Study participants include 20 to 100 healthy volunteers or people with disease conditions. The study lasts several months, and the main purpose is to study safety and dosages. That's phase 1. Phase 2, studies provide researchers with additional safety data to refine research questions, develop research methods, and design new phase 3 research protocols. Up to several hundred people with a disease or condition participate in the study that takes several months to 2 years to complete. Efficacy and side effects are primary study objectives. That's 2. Phase 3 provides the most safety data. Because these studies are larger and longer in duration, the results are more likely to show long-term or rare side effects. Participation can include 300 to 3,000 volunteers who have the disease or condition. The study can take 1 to 4 years to complete while researchers explore efficacy and monitor for adverse reactions. Phase 4. Trials are carried out once the drug or device has been approved by the FDA during post-market safety monitoring study. Participants include several thousand volunteers who have the disease condition. Safety and efficacy researches are the main focuses to analyze the story. Participating in clinical trials. People participate to help advance science and find cures. People with illnesses also enroll to receive experimental treatments and clinical care that could be helpful for their condition. Of course, there are potential risks as well as possible benefits to being in the trial. Participating is a very personal decision that requires careful consideration. Read personal stories and learn more about participating at the National Institute of Health Clinical Research Trials and a website that is https://tinyurl.com/small y 7 small w 4 small e 4 6x. That concludes that article. I'm now reading from the cover story of the AARP Bulletin. It's 99 Ways to Save. It's their 9th annual roundup of clever money. Saving ideas adds up to over $46,000 in potential extra cash in your pocket. I'm just going to pick out some of them. Design your own greeting card. Make cards for free at spark.adobe.com. Make card maker. Save up to $10 a card. Cross state lines for gas. Prices vary mostly due to different tax rates. Check gas prices at AAA.com if you're planning an interstate drive or live close to a state border. For example, filling up for $2.92 a gallon in Arizona instead of $3.71 a gallon in California will save you $7.80 on 10 gallons. Use baking soda for indigestion. Packaged remedies like Alka-Seltzer are largely baking soda and aspirin. So if you don't have a headache, drink a quarter of a teaspoon of baking soda dissolved in a quarter of a cup of water and save $8 per 36 doses. And eat for cheap. Get a list of discounts at about 70 restaurant chains at theseniorlist.com. Show your AARP card at Denny's, for example, and save $7.50 on a $50 check. Max out your library. Stream books, get first-run movies, or grab free passes to museums. For example, at many New York State public libraries, you can pick up a free admission to the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan, a savings of $25. Host morning parties. Brunch gatherings can be just as much fun as evening parties, and the food you serve, eggs, bread, tend to be cheaper than what you would serve for a dinner. Plus, you won't likely go through as much wine. Savings at least $40 on the food and wine, depending on the menu. Get Amtrak's senior discount. Folks 65 plus can get a 10% discount on most Amtrak train travel. You could save $22 in a round trip between New York and Chicago. Caveat, senior discount can't be combined with other discounts. Skip rental car insurance. Most of the time, you already have adequate coverage through your personal insurance. Check and save up to $40 a day. Give time as a gift. Write out redeemable coupons for babysitting, free drives to someone who doesn't drive, or home-cooked meals to someone who could use them. Save $50 or more you might spend on a gift. Use cruise control. It can reduce your fuel use by 7% on the highway. The average U.S. household spends about $2,000 a year in gasoline. If half your miles are on the highway, that's an average savings of $70 a year. Use the same insurer. Companies often charge up to 15% less if you buy both home and auto policies from them. You can save over $100 a year on insurance costs. Lastly, get wine by a case. Most wine stores will take at least 10% off your purchase if you walk out with 12 bottles. You'll save $48 on 2 cases of $20 worth of wine, and you'll always have a housewarming gift handy. So this concludes the reading of the senior program for today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Massachusetts Reading Network, a window to independent life in your community from Cape Cod to the Berkshires.
This is volunteer reader Holly Miller, broadcasting from Worcester, Massachusetts. Stay tuned for more coming your way.
WRRS Middleborough, Pittsfield, WVBF Middleborough, WDJM Framingham, WUML Lowell, WLLO Londonderry.
Please stay tuned to the Talking Information Center. Selected readings from National Review are headed your way next.
Well, hello again and welcome back. It's great to have you here for another session with National Review Magazine. Oh, you know the routine by now. This is where you sit back and relax while we thumb through the pages of National Review. See what they have to offer this time, right here on the Talking Information Center, which is the hub of the Massachusetts Reading Network. So let's start out today with an article entitled Women Need Guns. they can make the difference between life and death. This National Review article is written by Bethany Mandel. And Miss Mandel writes, several weeks ago we learned the results of a new survey. The United States is apparently one of the 10 most dangerous countries in the world for women. Well, it's not, actually, but that is the conclusion the left has reached and is promoting, based on inflated college rape statistics and the fetishizing of victimhood. The survey results were compiled not from actual statistics, but instead from 550 interviews with so-called women's experts around the world. From their answers, it's clear that those in the intersectional American left are walking around scared for their physical safety, or at least pretending to, even if that fear is not grounded in reality. America ranked in the same top 10 list as India, where women are all too frequently gang raped, killed at gunpoint, even sometimes set on fire afterwards. The United States came in at number 10, while Iran, where a woman was recently arrested and sentenced to 20 years in prison for protesting laws regulating the wearing of a hijab, Iran didn't rank at all. Anyone familiar with the truly dangerous climate for women in places such as India and the Middle East can understand that while the Me Too movement has raised necessary awareness of sexual harassment and assault here in the United States, it has not exposed our society to be inherently violent towards women. Relatively and realistically speaking, it is not uniquely dangerous for anyone to live in most parts of the country, no matter what the so-called women's experts may claim. The notion that women are so at risk in the United States becomes particularly interesting when one considers that the same liberal ideologues promoting it are also diametrically opposed to gun rights. The American left simultaneously holds the views that life is more dangerous for women here than in most places in the world, and that the Second Amendment should be repealed or at the very least dramatically curtailed. Even under constant threat, women, if gun rights opponents got their way, would not have the ability to protect themselves with the best defenses available. If women were really so threatened, so at risk of rape or assault at any given moment in the workplace or on the streets, what would we want them to have on their persons and in their homes to protect themselves? Would we want the strongest defense available to women to be pepper spray or a gun? There are, of course, dangerous areas and situations for women and men across the United States. Gun violence is perpetrated overwhelmingly by illegal gun owners, as studies tracking gun crimes in Chicago and Pittsburgh suggest. In many localities, the gun rights of law-abiding citizens are blocked by regulations that make it nearly impossible to carry, or sometimes even to own a gun legally. The stories of drive-by shootings and pizza delivery men robbed at gunpoint are well publicized, and most Americans think of young men when they think of gang violence. There is, however, little acknowledgement of the particular vulnerability women have in crime-prone areas that criminals view as soft targets. For many women, having a gun can mean the difference between being a defenseless victim and having the ability to protect oneself. In June of this year, Miranda Schaefer, a waitress in Wisconsin, used a gun she was licensed to carry to protect a co-worker from an attack. After a customer came into the kitchen to assault the restaurant's manager, Veronica Kaler, because his order was taking too long. Schaefer pulled a handgun from her waistband and pointed it at the assailant until he backed off. On television, Kayla explained that she had encouraged Schaefer to bring her firearm to work because incidents with customers were common. Kayla said, "I worked third shift for a whole year there, and it was incident after incident, robberies, you name it." Well, physically, Kayla was no match for her assailant, and the restaurant employed no security, but they didn't need a security guard because Schaefer had a gun. Guns are not just an equalizer in situations of random violence and robberies and potential rapes. They also keep women safe from attackers closer to home. After a woman we'll call Angela, after Angela married Tim, the usual period of newlywed bliss was shattered by Angela's discovery that Tim was not who she thought he was. He had severe mental health problems, and despite Angela's lifetime license to carry, she hesitated to bring a gun into their home because of Tim's threats of suicide. Her concern was grounded in her awareness of the statistics surrounding gun use in suicides and domestic violence incidents. There are, however, steps Angela could have taken in order to ensure she had gun accessible only to her, and one afternoon she wished she had. Here is how she tells the story. Angela says, "After a couple of years of marriage, one afternoon, in a regular occurrence of yelling at me, he snapped and attacked me in front of our baby. In those several seconds, I went from thinking I could possibly die to actually feeling bones in my leg break. I was powerless. After his attack, he ran out the front door, and I was left with our child. I called 911 and was shocked to find myself listening to hold music. I was on hold with 911 for approximately 5 minutes. It felt like eternity. In the meantime, I was texting my mother, asking her to come to my house. Finally, a 911 operator answered, and I told her what had happened. She told me the police were on their way, and she hung up. I thought they were supposed to stay on the phone with you until help arrives. I hobbled with my daughter into the living room, positioned myself in the middle of the room, halfway between the front door and the kitchen, so as to unlock the door for police, but to be able to hobble away in case my husband returned. Sure enough, he returned. I hurried into the kitchen. I was screaming. I was on the phone with my mom, and he grabbed the phone away. She was yelling for me to get outside in the open. I got out to the driveway space we share with our townhouse neighbors. At that point, it had been 10 or 15 minutes since I had hung up with 911. When the police arrived, well, where were the police? And why hadn't 911 stayed on the phone with me until help arrived? I live in one of the biggest cities in America, not a rural location. Well, finally, the first cop arrived without her sirens on, parked on the road, casually walked up to the house. I came to believe that though a gun on my person might not have been usable while I was being overpowered in the initial attack, it would have been helpful to have it in a safe upstairs that would only open with my fingerprints, to protect myself while I waited for the police. And so said the Angela of this article. To most feminists, feminism means eliminating power imbalances between men and women. A physical power imbalance between the sexes will always exist, but guns can level the playing field, potentially saving women's lives in the process. To many, gun culture in this country evokes images of hunters and sport shooters. It is thought of as almost universally male, but for women, such as Schaefer and Kayla and Angela, having the right to own a gun is so much more. It is potentially the difference between life and death. Well, let's get a little bit less heavy, dear listener, with a visit with our friend James Lilex and the column he writes regularly for National Review entitled Athwart. This particular issue has a headline that says "L'art pour l'étard." And James Lilex writes, the young lefties who moan about capitalism hold two ideas in their heads, and there's a lot of room above the neck, it seems. White people are stupid and racist and oppressive. Also, tiny Scandinavian countries with homogeneous populations as pale as a carload of chalk are the model for our future. Well, why? Socialism. It's a keen new idea all the kids are talking about. Name something and socialism does it better. The latest suggestion for our bright egalitarian future, which will be totally awesome and not have any guillotines at all, free movie passes. Now, perhaps you've heard of Movie Pass, one of those things that reveal a particular optimism in the investor class. You'd pay $9.99 a month to see as many movies as you liked. It was like Outback Steakhouse selling a $5 all-you-can-eat steak ticket. But it's running out of money, so now you can eat only $3 per month. Leave it to our new socialists to solve the problem, though. In an essay for the Outline.com, Carmen Petaccio made a rather counterintuitive proposal. Let us first understand her perspective. The reason MoviePass has always seemed too good to be true is that consumers have been trained to perceive too goodness through a very specific lens, the defeatist lens of a market that conditions most of its participants to accept an insufficient, exploited existence as more than enough. Carmen Petaccio continues, saying, smashing that lens can begin with the end of MoviePass. Well, just to remind you, the insufficient, exploited existence that we're trained to accept in our defeatist state is a pass that lets you see unlimited movies for $9.99 a month. So what shall we have after this is smashed? We should let the privately owned MoviePass die so a nationalized public MoviePass can live, she says. Nationalization. The go-to solution for dreamy Westerners. Once something is wrested from the hands of the overlords and given to different overlords, it'll be better. The government is never anything but kind and generous, and think of all the jobs that will be created, especially in the Golden Goose slaughterhouse. A government-owned, money-losing MoviePass is hardly outside the realm of American political discourse. The author writes, unless your economic philosophy falls to the right of libraries, universal access to art programs are neither novel nor radical. Well, to the right of libraries makes sense only if you're giving directions to someone. Perhaps she means those wacky libertarians who oppose any sort of shared public work that requires taxation. Well, they exist. But down with libraries isn't the stem-winder phase of a libertarian stump speech. Even Ayn Rand would roll her eyes and say, "Focus, my boy, focus." Well, just to recap, if you support libraries, then you've no argument against making movies free. Well, that's like saying if you support food banks, you should believe that restaurants shouldn't charge anyone. The author bemoans the high cost of books and art. What parents are willing to drop $100 to take their kids to the Met? Well, the Met's website says, for New York State residents and New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut students, the amount you pay is up to you. Or perhaps she's referring to the Metropolitan Opera, where no kids want to go ever, because it's just old people yelling in wiggly voices. But let's get back to the movies. She says one of the strengths of a publicly owned movie pass would be the scope of its appeal, the ability to elicit support from the radical leftists at Sorry to Bother You, as well as the corporate fascists at Avengers Infinity War. Yeah. Well, one of the problems with a publicly owned movie pass is the people who insist that theaters not show the products of corporate fascists. You'd have a series of dreary spinach movies. Star Wars would turn into Star negotiated settlement with reparations for historical injustices. The author proposes using the power of the state to compel every taxpayer to pay $120 a year, and in return we would be granted one free movie per day. Who could complain? Perhaps people who haven't the time to see a movie every day and wonder why they should pay for someone who obviously has enough time to earn money for his own damn ticket. But if you think like that, you fail to appreciate the role that movies have played in assuaging communal anxieties. She writes, as the stupefying horrors of our shared reality mount, our collective need for art rises along with it. Oh, this will be fun. Citizen, here is your bill for the National Arts Collective Project. Pay, or we will take your house. Well, why do I have to pay? Well, because of our shared reality. It has horrors that both stupefy and mount. Okay. Do you take checks? The so-called collective need for art will be quickly redefined as art for the collective, and it will be expected to hew to whatever the state requires. The very people who hate Trump want to give Trump the power to greenlight movies. Except, of course, it won't be Trump, but some enlightened figure whose brilliant rule ensures that no Trump shall ever rise again. The author wants the nationalized movie pass to cover all art, of course. That's libraries and concert venues, museums, the entirety of recorded music. You can almost see the author typing. And Netflix should be free, too. But thinking, no, too soon, and striking the line. She ends the piece with the sunny confidence of everyone who grew up believing the gains of Western Civ are a happy accident, and its sins a poison poured into the mouths of perfectible humanity. And she says, let all good things come to an end. Replace them with something better. Well, that always works out well. At least you get full employment for guillotine blade sharpeners. Well, dear listener, let's get into a kind of a longer article than that. It's written by Alexander Nazarian, Nazaryan. Alexander Nazarian is a national correspondent for Yahoo News in Washington, D.C. And he writes an article entitled Fantasyland. A liberal explains why he gave up on Berkeley. There were 7 men climbing the hillside through thickets of sagebrush and lupine, through groves of oak and pine. Finally, they came to an outcropping of rock, which they scaled, and from there they could see the bay rippling in the afternoon light. 2 ships were out there, heading for the open waters of the Pacific. The glorious moment called for recognition. Frederick Billings, a Vermonter who'd come west during the gold rush, supplied the grace note in the form of a verse from George Berkeley, the 18th century English philosopher. Westward, the course of empire takes its way. And that was how Berkeley, California got its name. I wasn't there, obviously, but my imagination pulled me like a tide to that moment during the 3 years I spent in Berkeley with my wife and 2 children. I am a terribly plodding runner, but nevertheless an avid one. Daily I huffed up those very same hills and looked at that very same bay, and filled with the very same wonder of those men 152 years ago. Now, this was especially so when fog obscured the skyscrapers of San Francisco, effacing the human element, leaving only you and the water, the tops of the hills, the milky cloud-covered sky. But this was fantasy. Below, the frontier settlement of 1866 was no longer. Descending back to town always left me coated in a thin film of dread. I was sinfully sour with my wife and children, perfectly graceless with the in-laws who had wholly funded our move from New York to California. By the time I realized that I hated the place, it was with tremendous relief, as when a spouse realizes that a marriage has run its course even as her counterpart cluelessly makes vacation plans. But it would take a rather long while to figure out why, and what that irreducible antipathy had to do with liberalism, Berkeley's and my own. Bishop Berkeley would prove a prescient namesake for this Northern California city that has made its sibling across the bay, San Francisco, seem staid by comparison. Berkeley was a subjective idealist who argued that there was no world apart from the world each one of us experienced. He famously postulated, "To be is to be perceived." Today's popular injunction to live your truth is the simpleton cousin of Berkeley's insight that there wasn't any other truth to be lived. Berkeley has been living its own truth for the last half-century, sailing ideologically away from the landmass of America like those 2 ships headed into the shimmering gap of the Golden Gate. Ever since wild-haired graduate student Mario Savio stood on the steps of Sproul Hall, the central administrative building of the University of California at Berkeley, which dominates the town. Ever since he stood there and urged his fellow rebels to put your bodies upon the gears of an infernal machine of the post-industrial state, Berkeley has been a lefty fantasia, a national counter-narrative in which Henry A. Wallace, the New Deal-era socialist, became president, and Ronald Reagan was best known for B-movie schlock, such as Cowboy from Brooklyn, a city where Hugo Chavez is remembered only as a revolutionary who brought red plenty to the masses, and Dick Cheney is not remembered at all. For decades now, Berkeley's primary export has been defiance, the first Indigenous Peoples Day to replace Columbus Day, the first municipal divestiture from the apartheid South Africa, the first mandated warning that cell phones may cause cancer despite evidence to the contrary, the first tax on sugar-sweetened drinks, the first marijuana sanctuary city. 3 days after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, Barbara Lee, who represents Berkeley and Oakland in Congress, became the only member of either chamber to vote against granting President George W. Bush the authorization to use military force. This is, as the popular internet meme goes, the future that liberals want. Or do we? There have lately been signs that after decades of threatening to run away from home, this angel-headed hipster is ready to take her seat at America's bountiful and unabashedly capitalist table. She will sulk at Obama and snarl at Manhattan, but she will accept her lot. At this point, she doesn't have much choice. Chipotle Grill has come to Shattuck Avenue, where students once squared off against the National Guard. So have Equinox fitness clubs. Oh, there are still hippies, but they have aged, grown despondent, aware that they have been duped by history, which conformed perfectly to the prediction of Karl Marx by turning out to be a farce. The bumper stickers on their Volkswagen buses are appealing. The tie-dye T-shirts stretch over beer bellies. A crucial battle has been lost. Nowhere is this more evident than in People's Park, a scrubby patch of land just south of the Berkeley campus and encompassing a single city block. Its name is a misnomer that would have made George Orwell blush. These 3 acres are not a park at all, but are entirely indisputable fact, owned by the university. In the fervid spring of 1969, student activists protested a plan by Berkeley to eventually build housing there, citing the desire for an off-campus, so-called free speech area. Eventually, the protesters grew unruly, and the National Guard was called in to keep the peace. The ensuing confrontation cost 1 student his life, but it also elevated the national stature of California's governor, the aforementioned hero of B cinema. As for the land itself, well, it remained fallow. People's Park, however, does not belong to the people in any ecumenical sense of the word, though there are park-like facilities, including a playground and basketball courts. Only the intrepid or the tragically unaware would ever use them. That's because the entirety of its turbulent existence, People's Park has functioned as a homeless encampment, and not one that has exactly embraced the idealism of the Summer of Love. An angry sore on this landscape of golds and greens, People's Park is Berkeley's most potent argument against itself. Oh, you can't really blame the bedraggled denizens of People's Park for its filth and grime, for the revulsion that the mere name evokes in locals. Many of the people who live there are visibly tortured, whether by drugs or drink or inner demons. A few admirably dedicated activists bring them food, but for the most part, the people of People's Park are left alone, making for a weird détente in this city where an informed citizenry coupled with a ferociously liberal government pride themselves on solving problems Washington and Sacramento will not solve. Nobody quite knows what to do. But after a half-century of inaction, a growing number of locals are coming to feel that they ought to do something. This has caused great concern among those for whom People's Park has an importance far greater than its geographical imprint may indicate, like the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem. A so-called threat to People's Park is a threat to what Berkeley has believed itself to be since 1964. This past April, posters appeared on Berkeley's utility poles. Wooden beams, scabrous with staples and shreds of paper, the remnants of older handbills calling for a protest against the Trump administration, or just as frequently the construction of market-rate condominium buildings. Posters appeared. Prepare now for the People's Park riots of 2018, a new notice declared. It said date and time to be announced. While the riots were presumably being planned, the poster urged concerned citizens to contact Berkeley's chief spokesman, Dan Mogilov, and the city's mayor, a hapless and bumblingly ambitious young progressive named Jesse Arreguin, who in 2016 earned an endorsement from Bernie Sanders and beat an establishment candidate on the same night that Donald Trump won the White House. The communards were being summoned to People's Park once again, because Berkeley had declared its intent to finally reclaim its land, not a decade too soon. Reclaim its land and build student housing there. Berkeley's campus is terrifically overcrowded. According to the university, it can currently house only 1/5 of its 42,000 students, leaving the rest to hunt for dwellings in the nation's most viciously expensive housing market. The new dormitories to be erected on the site of People's Park would house about 1,000. There would also be, according to a university press release, there would also be 75 to 125 apartments that will provide safe and supervised living for homeless Berkeley residents. While this may seem like a beneficent gesture, not to mention an effective one, those for whom People's Park is hallowed ground saw only an affront. Ergo, there had to be riots. The riots remain in planning stages, I'm happy to report, but they wouldn't have been the first Berkeley riots in the age of Trump. The first took place about a week after Trump's inauguration, when former Breitbart editor, senior editor Milo Yiannopoulos, was slated to give one of his witless talks on campus. Leftist activists saved him the trouble by rampaging through campus and town, punishing for his alleged transgressions an outlet of Starbucks, which had recently committed to hiring thousands of refugees. It was an ugly scene that earned denunciation from both Fox News commentators and original members of the free speech movement. There followed, in the months to come, several skirmishes between triggered liberals and those who delighted in triggering them. These were waged with fists and baseball bats and sundry other weapons, downhill from a parking area reserved for the university's many Nobel laureates. The brawls were tragic and comic and pointless, especially so because they were conducted in a park named for Martin Luther King, Jr., in full view of a police force that had reportedly been ordered by Mayor Arreguin to stand down, lest it be accused of policing. Competing with New York's Bill de Blasio in the arena of progressive self-delusion, Arreguin mused that the riots had to do with the fact that he was of Latino background as if the rich taxonomy of goon that descended on Berkeley in the spring and summer of 2017 had been looking to do anything but connect fist with jaw. Like a child unable to let a provocation pass, Berkeley, by which I mean some complex combination of town and gown, with a healthy anti-Fa contingent from the greater Bay Area thrown into the mix, Berkeley protested when pundit Ann Coulter, when pundit Ann Coulter planned to come to campus. She stayed away. Ben Shapiro did come, did speak, but only after law enforcement from seemingly every agency in California cordoned off part of a section of campus and made attendees undergo airport-style security measures. The season of black masks and black smoke culminated in the appearance Yiannopoulos had been promising for months. This consisted of the frosted-tipped philosopher and a few of his supporters posing with insensate mirth on the very same steps where Savio had once inveighed against the corporate state. Now, this time around, the corporate state had to spend $800,000 to keep the peace. I arrived in Berkeley on September 16th of 2015, the day of the second Republican primary debate. I was there on November 9th, 2016, when the place had a funereal feel, and even serious people spoke of secession from the United States. The last one such effort was seemingly funded by the Russians, the other by a venture capitalist with a record of sexual assault allegations against him. Last I consulted a map, neither had succeeded. There were many demonstrations, even if there was nothing especially original about the sentiments being demonstrated for or against. Signs bearing only an iambic injunction, resist, appeared in the windows of sprawling downtown Victorians and angular mid-century modern homes high up in the beautifully golden hills. What we were to resist was clear. How to resist was not. And so, not quite knowing what to do, people went on with their lives. During the 3 years we spent in Berkeley, my wife would sometimes joke that I had been singled out for cosmic justice, a child of the Soviet Union, and a one-time contributor to the Dartmouth Review, no less, extracted like a Woody Allen character from the New York he knows and loves, thrust into a place that remained equivocal in its assessment of Stalin. There was, indeed, something frustrating about being among people who saw no contradiction between supporting the socialist government in Venezuela, where people starved, and shopping blithely at the Berkeley Bowl amid 11 succulent varieties of organic peaches. I did not emerge from Berkeley on the right, the way David Horowitz and many others have. Yet the crisis in liberalism came to seem much more clear than it had in the many years we spent in New York, where a collective desperation about the state of the subways had always erased political difference. Berkeley is far too small for that. Its politics potent and undiluted. And if in the 1960s Berkeley served as a symbol of liberalism's possibilities, by 2017 it had become a symbol of liberalism's failures. I recognize that many of my readers are conservatives, but they should not cheer that devolution. A healthy democracy needs two lungs, one supplying oxygen on the right, the other on the left. When one collapses, the whole corpus suffers. What happened in Berkeley was closer to intellectual pneumonia, the result of a city that suddenly found itself shuddering in the drenching rain of reality. For years, the people here practiced the politics of gesture. And because gestures felt good and California was the land of good feeling, they kept making gestures as noble as they were pointless. To this day, when you drive from Oakland into Berkeley along College Avenue, you're greeted by a sign that declares Berkeley a nuclear-free zone, dispelling any fears that Nike missile arrays might be nestled in the hills. The sign is not just silly. It is preposterously ahistorical. Berkeley professors were instrumental in the Manhattan Project, and the university continues to receive millions annually from the Department of Defense. Even more telling is the sign on Shattuck Avenue, right next to the one proclaiming the city nuclear-free. It's a warning against drunken driving. It says you can't afford it. Well, that third scotch and soda may do much more danger to your life than enriched uranium, even if the former isn't quite as much fun to protest. While gestures tend to denote, and the gesture politics of Berkeley was meant, as a whole, to denote a city-state above the fray of the common man. Like Athens, it was to be a place of superior wine, of resplendent hills blessed by the gods, of wise men whose genius was as boundless as the wine-dark sea. Thing is, Athens fell, undone by forces internal and external, and something similar is happening to Berkeley, even if no severe Spartans have come ransacking up from San Jose. Even Trump is not to blame. His tweets about high tax, high crime, California notwithstanding. With so many layers of government between Telegraph and Pennsylvania avenues, he might as well be the president of Mongolia. The force undoing Berkeley originated much closer to home. It was birthed on the campus of rival Stanford, migrating quickly to the garages of Palo Alto and Menlo Park. From there it leapt to the office parks of Mountain View and Sunnyvale, then to coveted San Francisco, where the new Salesforce Tower stands over the city like a conquering colossus, a glimmer in its naked capitalist splendor. Well, Berkeley has tried to resist the digital revolution, doing everything it can to be as hostile as possible to the tech economy that is gobbling up the Bay Area like Pac-Man. The city made no effort to attract tech companies the way neighboring Oakland did. Just as important, city leaders gave in to the pressure of activists who wanted no housing built in the city at all, if there was even the remote possibility that housing would attract someone who hadn't seen the Grateful Dead in concert a dozen times. A recent article in the New York Times, for example, chronicled the saga of a developer who wanted to build a couple of bungalows on empty land that he owned. It took him 2 years of litigation merely to receive a permit to do so. I expect the project will be completed in about a decade. Protracted litigation over housing is what Berkeley does. Developers have been branded Hitler for merely suggesting that an empty lot does not well serve the city's interests. Gentrification has become a synonym for change. In particular, any change that counters the forces of urban despair and disarray. I have been told conservatives fear change, and that may well be true, but you should meet Berkeley's liberals. The crushing irony is that the techies are the children, or at least the nephews, of the hippies. The difference is that Steve Jobs, unlike Wavy Gravy, decided to trim his hair and get a job. As for the business suit, well, that would have been a bridge too far. The techies digitized their utopia, then monetized it, as the hippies kept installing placards about nuclear-free zones, or how they stood in solidarity with the Khmer Rouge and the Sandinistas. The hippies of Berkeley were outflanked, and they were outflanked by their own progeny. No wonder their seething is profound. They wanted a revolution, and they got one, only it was in precisely the wrong direction. The hippies have found unlikely allies in a disgruntled segment of youth who have recently discovered that elaborate tattoos and degrees in intersectional hegemony make life in modern society acutely untenable. Like the hippies, they were fooled. And if they were only less brittle, they would have all of my compassion, but they plainly don't want it. Like their older, bearded counterparts, this group is taken to striding angrily down Berkeley's thoroughfares, snarling at anyone whom I deign to wear professional attire. At the heart of this animus is an enormous entitlement, a feeling that Berkeley belongs only to those who harbor certain convictions. Those who don't are invited to live and work elsewhere. Dallas, perhaps. No, or at least Walnut Creek. Despite the ubiquitous "hate has no place here" placards adorning homes and storefronts, Berkeley in 2018 seems almost entirely governed by its animosities. A city councilwoman, Cheryl Davila, has taken to asking potential employees whether they are, as she is, a zealous advocate of the Palestinian cause. How the concerns of West Berkeley align with those of the West Bank is not entirely clear. If anything, the city's most impoverished district could probably benefit from the investment of Israeli technology firms looking to enter the Bay Area market. But like the current occupant of the White House, Berkeley's political leaders need their ideological bugbears. Take away the Zionists, and they just might have to govern. Nearly as maligned as supporters of the Jewish state are those who might crave a hamburger. Last year, some militant vegans forced a butcher shop to put a sign in the window that said, "Attention, animals' lives are their right. Killing them is violent and unjust, no matter how it's done." Well, he was a small business owner, his animals ethically procured, but the vegans demanded he display the placard, or they said they would protest in front of his store indefinitely. They did not make similar demands of supermarket chains, for that would have taken a drop of courage. More recently, they buried a piglet in a public park. Their demand was that animals be treated as what they call individuals. Meanwhile, in nearby Emeryville and Oakland, the two cities are effectively contiguous with Berkeley. Meanwhile, in nearby Emeryville and Oakland, someone burned down several apartment buildings in the midst of construction. This cost millions of dollars, displaced hundreds of people. Anywhere else, it would have been an outrage. In the East Bay, it was a natural consequence of gentrification, and a welcome one. One commuter posted to a news story about one of the East Bay construction fires. The commenter said, "This is what real class warfare looks like. People are not just going to sit around and do nothing, as all options are taken from them." It would be a grave mistake to think that most people in Berkeley endorse this brand of extremism. They most definitely do not. Berkeley may be the one place in America where there is a silent majority of liberals, In other words, people who espouse an Obama-like brand of inclusive, technocratic neoliberalism, but are afraid to say so because, like the conservative silent majority that Richard M. Nixon described 5 decades ago, they will be branded troglodytic fascists. That is why response to the People's Park development has been truly revealing. The majority refused to be silenced by the hoarse voices of the old left. If the revolutionaries were somewhat more aware, they would have realized that they were surrounded. Despite the calls for a second set of People's Park riots, it very quickly became clear that most people in Berkeley wanted nothing of the kind, at least to judge by the comments on Berkeley's Side. Berkeley's Side is the excellent local news site that has gotten national praise for its novel, direct public offering of preferred stock, the kind of creative capitalism Fidel Castro did not exactly endorse. One commenter wrote, "Any good thing People's Park may have represented disappeared long ago. Only a completely out-of-touch individual would think it's a good idea to keep People's Park around in its current state as a nexus for crime and drugs." There are hundreds of comments in precisely this vein, while no more than 1 out of 10 called, unconvincingly called, for the place to remain as is. Mind you, the vast majority of comments, and in fact the vast majority of people in Berkeley, want a humane solution to the homelessness crisis, just as they want new housing that won't force an 85-year-old lady to the curb or efface the region's rich African-American history. What they don't want is lectures about how they're spoiling a Marxist paradise with their retrograde views. Anyone who thinks People's Park is on the way to heaven must be a student of Pol Pot, if not the Marquis de Sade. I had the misfortune of being born into a utopia. Leningrad, 1980s. Like every other utopia imposed by man upon his fellow man, it was a miserable place to live. But it did have one thing that Berkeley desperately lacks. It had civic order. That order was fostered by fear. But so is all civic order to some degree. Driving on the freeways of Los Angeles, we fear consequences. And even if those consequences don't involve a protracted stint in Siberia, they may nevertheless be severe enough to keep most people from attempting to break the sound barrier on the 405. And once we have order, we may seek and gain higher order benefits of organized society, peace and prosperity and progress. Oh, we may disagree on what those benefits might be, but even rational disagreement is a luxury. Berkeley is not big on civic order. It has a municipal government, but its elective officers are conspicuously invisible. Having long ago confused the difference between liberal and libertine, they no longer know what to do with the downtown that looks like the Bowery of 1986, except without any of the qualities that made Manhattan back then enthralling. Much like Trump, they are impressively adept at blaming others. Solutions for both have proved rather more elusive. Government tells people what they should and should not do. And as everyone in Berkeley knows, restricting another's freedom makes you no better than a fascist. So what prevailed during my time there was a kind of chaotic libertarianism. Garbage was deposited with a breathtaking creativity. I once found a bookcase in front of our house, left by a person who'd taken care to attach a crude sign announcing that the teetering edifice of wooden slats was what the sign called free. Petty crime, in particular, the grab-and-run theft of laptops from coffee shops, was so common as to function as a kind of tax. There is a fundamental dishonesty to this approach. The truly rich who live in the hills suffered none of these depredations because, as someone told me when we first moved to Berkeley, crime don't climb. Nothing really does except for wealth. And for all the talk of income inequality, I saw little evidence that the wealth ensconced up in the canyons and the hills had much intention of coming back down. We lived in the flats, in a lovely house where my in-laws thought we would continue to wage the fight that they have waged for the past 50 years. And we effectively spurned them at my urging, which proved as uncomfortable as you may imagine. And yet my gripes are not with them or even with Berkeley, but with the people who decided to make Berkeley a laboratory for their brand of liberalism, and who persisted with that experiment even when it went horribly amiss. Take weed, for example. Although by all means don't take it as eagerly as Berkeley has. 3 blocks from our house was a marijuana dispensary, by far the most thriving business in the neighborhood. Many of the dispensary's customers parked in front of our house. On a daily basis, I collected from outside our house crushed cans of beer, single-serving plastic bottles of liquor, every variety of junk food imaginable. The question of how to dispose of a stranger's condom had not occurred to me until one morning it very much did. Same with the remains of a hypodermic needle. You will be unsurprised to learn that I invested in good garden gloves. Though I supported and continue to support decriminalization measures that would keep young men of color out of prison, so do some conservatives. But it strikes me as shockingly irresponsible to tell consumers almost nothing of the deleterious effects that marijuana causes in the human brain, particularly a developing one. And while it's easy enough to condemn telecommunications companies for supposedly giving us cancer, no plans have been made to regulate stoned drivers, and that would seriously harsh Berkeley's mellow. Nobody in Berkeley ever wants to find herself in assent with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, a longtime opponent of marijuana, who, entre nous, does little favor to the cause with his prelapsarian rhetoric. But does that mean we must foist on the unsuspecting young of 2018 the failed dreams of 1968? Perhaps not. As in the case of People's Park, there is a narrative running counter to the one Berkeley loves to tell itself. When it was recently revealed that South Berkeley, where we lived, would play host to a second marijuana dispensary, this one just steps from a school, the protest was swift and intense. It was the sort of thing you might have seen in Greenwich, Connecticut. As is, it was just blocks away from where Allen Ginsberg once lived. Marijuana has long been central to Berkeley's conception of itself and the journey from the relatively weak grass of the 1960s to today's killer bud. That journey is revealing. It may have been naive, but at least the midnight tokers of that time thought they were opening the doors of consciousness, escaping into lush groves of insight from which the man in the gray flannel suit would forever be excluded. Today's stuff, according to one study, Today's stuff is 5 times stronger than what people were smoking in 1980. No doors of perception are opening in Berkeley these days. Not with strains like space cakes and chemdag leading the way. These are means of pushing away the world, of deadening the senses. In other words, religion is not the only opiate of the masses, nor is weed for that matter. The more dangerous, I came to believe after 3 years in Berkeley, is a self-surety that sets upon a people who declare themselves immune to critical scrutiny, who are so certain that they have found the answers, they decline to ask any more questions. Of course, this is not solely a liberal problem, nor a Berkeley one, but it is especially pronounced here, in this glorious, ruined place between the hill and the bay, where the revolution has been on the cusp of happening for half a century. Long before anyone was worried about sugary drinks, Berkeley knew, just as it knew about the military-industrial complex. But in its quest to stay eternally woke, Berkeley went blind. Well, now see what we've gone and done, dear listener. We're going to get in trouble now for going way, way over our time. But it was kind of an interesting trip through the pages of National Review magazine this session, was it not? And we'll be back again, same time, same place. Hope you can make it, right here on the Talking Information Center, which is the hub of the Massachusetts Reading Network.
Thank you for listening to the Massachusetts Reading Network, a window to independent life in your community from Cape Cod to the Berkshires.
This is Volunteer Reader Doug, broadcasting from Marshfield, Massachusetts. Stay tuned for more coming your way next.
WRRS Middleborough, Pittsfield, WVBF Middleborough, WDJM Framingham, WUML Lowell, WLLO Londonderry.
We invite you now to stay tuned to the Talking Information Center for selected readings from the Washington Examiner. It's headed your way next.
Welcome, everyone. This is Maggie speaking, reading the Washington Examiner as of September 9th, 2018, keeping you informed of the current happenings on the nation's capital. Election year pressure keeps Democrats digging for new ways to block Kavanaugh, by Susan Verrecchio. Election year politics have pushed Senate Democrats to throw up every obstacle they can find in a likely futile effort to derail the confirmation of Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Now that the hearings are over, Senate Democrats are facing likely losses in the November midterm elections and hoping to excite their base, aren't giving up. After last week's chaotic confirmation hearings, which were marked by protesters interrupting the proceedings with shouts until they were dragged out by police, Democrats said they kept digging for ways to try to influence the outcome of the final Senate vote to confirm Kavanaugh, which is slated to take place in late September. Republicans have a 2-vote majority now that Senator John Kyle, Republican from Arizona, has been sworn in to fill the seat vacated by the death of the GOP Senator John McCain. Only a simple majority is needed to confirm Kavanaugh, leaving Democrats with no real path to block him on their own. Despite the seemingly impossible math, progressive activists are clamoring for Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, the Democrat from New York, and other Democratic lawmakers to find a way to stop Kavanaugh from reaching the high court, where he will likely push it firmly to the right for the first time in many decades. What more can we do? Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, told the Washington Examiner, "I tell you, we'll use every tool available. There isn't much time." Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley, a Republican from Iowa, plans to set aside this week only for Kavanaugh to answer follow-up questions from panel lawmakers. Grassley said he'll hold a committee vote on the nominees September 13th, which will push the confirmation to the Senate floor. In the interim, Blumenthal said Democratic staffers are digging through Kavanaugh's long paper trail, searching for a smoking gun they could use to make the nominee less appealing to moderate Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who are the only remotely possible no Republican votes and so far appear ready to confirm him. There are more documents, Blumenthal said as the hearing churned to a conclusion. We are at it right now. For the most part, Democrats were unable to trip up Kavanaugh after 2 days of intense questioning about his opinions written during 12 years as a federal judge or his time serving in the George W. Bush White House. Democrats have not laid a single glove on Kavanaugh, Senator Ted Cruz, a Republican from Texas, said on Fox News. Democrats pivoted Thursday to the contents of tens of thousands of pages of unreleased documents pertaining to Kavanaugh's White House employment that Republicans had ruled confidential to the committee. Senator Cory Booker, a Democrat from New Jersey, a member of the committee and a possible 2020 presidential contender, led the effort to expose the contents of documents Democrats believe contradicts Kavanaugh's testimony or otherwise raise questions about his fitness for the high court. Booker released what were once committee confidential documents, he said, related to Kavanaugh's views on racial profiling. He touted the move on Twitter, daring the Senate to push him for breaking the rules. Committee Republicans said that the documents had already been made public and accused Booker of grandstanding. I think Senator Booker wants to make himself a martyr in aid of his presidential campaign, said Senator Majority Whip John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, a member of the Judiciary Committee. Other Judiciary Committee Democrats joined Booker's efforts, releasing more committee confidential emails, although the documents might have actually been cleared for release by the GOP. Senator Mazi Hirono, a Democrat from Hawaii, tweeted Bush-era Kavanaugh emails she said show that the Judge Kavanaugh wrongly believes that Native Hawaiian programs are constitutionally questionable. She added, I defy anyone reading this to be able to conclude that it should be deemed confidential in any way, shape, or form. In an interview with the Washington Examiner, Hirono said that the conclusion of the hearings won't end her efforts to derail Kavanaugh, who she calls a fifth vote, because Kavanaugh would join 4 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court. I will continue with every opportunity to talk about the dangers posed by this fifth vote on the Supreme Court, Hirono said, dangers to the Affordable Care Act and a woman's right to choose. And I hope that people are mobilizing across the country to realize this fifth vote will matter to all of our lives. Perhaps something will come out of that. Democrats have few parliamentary avenues to slow down the final confirmation vote. McConnell is planning for late September. Schumer last week used Senate rules to try to block the confirmation hearings from continuing, but it resulted only in the Senate floor gaveling to a close for the day while the hearing continued for 12 hours. Schumer has used daily floor speeches to rail against the nominee and the confirmation process, arguing the GOP is trying to jam through Kavanaugh without revealing his entire record. At every turn, the Republican majority, the Trump administration, and Judge Brett Kavanaugh have prevented the Senate and the American people from being truly able to vet the nominee who could affect the lives of Americans for generations, Schumer said. Representative Tom Tillis, a Republican from North Carolina, said Republicans understand the Democratic tactics result from an election year map that has left them poised to lose seats to the GOP in November. They are just using the device that a minority is going to use, Tillis said, but at the end of the day, Kavanaugh gets confirmed, and he gets confirmed in time for the Supreme Court session. Who Dares Take On Nancy Pelosi by Laura Barron Lopez. For House Democrats, the August recess was all about November. After 8 years in the minority, Democrats are in the best position to retake the House, and they're trying not to mess it up. But the August recess was also about Democrats' longtime leader Nancy Pelosi. Aware of the threat to her 16-year reign, Pelosi made the media rounds, providing interviews to the New York Times, Associated Press, and NPR. She blasted out op-eds and articles about her tenure to her members, reminding them why she's needed at the helm. And she raised nearly $91 million for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee this cycle, CNN reported in August. Simultaneously, one of her deputies, Representative Jim Clyburn, a Democrat from South Carolina, began a campaign of his own, pitching himself as a potential bridge leader should Pelosi fall short of the votes needed to become a speaker. Some see Clyburn's move as an attempt to push House Minority Whip Steny Hoyer, a Democrat from Maryland, out of the picture. Hoyer's long presented himself as a possible bridge to the new generation, and others speculated Clyburn's posturing is a signal from the Congressional Black Caucus that it expects to be included in any conversation about a new leader. Challenges to Pelosi's leadership aren't new, but this time, members say, is different. Democrats are clawing their way back from the abyss, and those calling for an ouster have steadily increased in number. Not only are current members daring to open their mouths, where in the past they had shied away from the topic, but they're drawing strength from the several dozen Democratic candidates who have said, if elected, they'd vote against the California Democrat. In August alone, there were at least 10 articles about Pelosi's leadership across publications, with a strong presence on Capitol Hill. Then there are op-eds. Who's afraid of Nancy Pelosi? Make way for young leaders. Pelosi's been good for the Democrats. Don't toss her without a backup plan. I can take the heat, and that's why I stay in the kitchen, Pelosi told AP. No one really knows what is going to happen. If Democrats fail to take the majority, all three Democratic leaders will likely be booted. If Democrats win, it becomes a numbers game. She has to compete like everyone else, said Representative Brenda Lawrence, a Democrat from Michigan. Obviously, Pelosi has experience and skills, but she's got to compete. But there's one critical question that no one is answering. Who can replace Pelosi? The agitators. In the 2 years since Ohio Democratic Tim Ryan challenged Pelosi and lost, a small group of members have been on a mission to oust the California Democrat, bringing more of their colleagues into the fold and sowing doubt about her leadership whenever possible. Representatives Kathleen Rice, a Democrat from New York, and Seth Moulton, a Democrat from Massachusetts, are open about their desire for a new leader. The two are often singled out by other members as the head provocators of the effort to whip people against Pelosi. Moulton is spreading his message outside of Washington. The Marine veteran has taken a number of Democratic House candidates under his wing, and though he swears they are all independent thinkers, many have taken his lead on calling for new leadership. Those who joined the chorus against Pelosi, including Moulton, have shown frustration with the GOP's ability to paint her as a coastal liberal, making her into a villain on the campaign trail. But the effectiveness of those attacks is somewhat outweighed by Trump's own negatives. As the talk of a leadership race intensifies, Ryan has encouraged Moulton to use his growing number of recruits as leverage. If Pelosi or Clyburn want the support of Moulton's expanding coalition, they must give concessions. Then there's Ryan himself. After insisting he wouldn't challenge Pelosi again, Ryan reversed course in July. The defeat of the New York Democrat Joe Crowley changed everything. Crowley, the caucus chairman, was considered by many the heir apparent. His surprising loss to a 28-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rattled the entire caucus, leaving a void that has yet to be filled. With Crowley out, Ryan is again mulling a challenge to Pelosi. In August, he told the Washington Examiner that he'd only jump in if he thinks he can win. We're not closing the door on the leader race, but the key is to get more members of the House elected that represent districts like the one I represent, so we can have enough political push to get the kind of economic stuff done that we need done, Ryan said. Through openly mulling a bid, Ryan is also boosting Clyburn. He says he won't sacrifice himself to make way for Clyburn, who, like Pelosi, is nearing 80, but it's one scenario that isn't too far-fetched. If Ryan runs against Pelosi and she doesn't secure the votes necessary in the private caucus vote set for December, it would provide an opening for Clyburn to step forward without directly challenging her. If anybody's going to be the bridge, it's going to be Jim Clyburn, said Ryan. Jim brings change, but it's unclear if Clyburn would be a consensus candidate in the way many saw Crowley to be. If not Pelosi, who? The first speaker, Representative Yvette Clarke, the Democrat from New York, ever voted for was Pelosi. That was in 2007, after Democrats retook the House for the first time in 12 years. I don't personally see a reason why she would not continue to be a good speaker, Clarke said. No one, Clarke said, with the exception of Crowley, has demonstrated an ability to step into the top leadership role with the experience necessary to fight Trump. It would be a real leap of faith, Clarke said, to put her support behind someone else. For all the speculation and posturing by members, Pelosi is the only declared candidate in the hypothetical speaker race. And shortly after Clyburn began positioning himself in the press as a possible successor to Pelosi, she pounced. If people want to be the bridge that I'm building toward, they have to show what's on the other side of the bridge, Pelosi told the Times during a Texas campaign swing in August. So far, Ryan, who garnered 63 votes in the 2016 caucus vote, is the only one who has come close to entertaining a direct challenge. Next is Clyburn and Hoyer. Clyburn's campaign to be the bridge to new leaders is supported by a number of congressional Black Caucus members, but not all. Others in the caucus would rather see someone like Representative Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, take the helm. But Jeffries, like Clyburn, won't run against Pelosi. Clyburn's willingness to keep the conversation concerning Pelosi's future alive, however, highlights the eagerness within the caucus to envision a future without their longtime leader. Hoyer has remained quiet on the topic, saying his singular force is on winning back the House. But Hoyer's allies saying it is unlikely that the Maryland Democrat, who has waited in the wings for 16 years, will sit idly by if Claiborne attempts to leapfrog over him. If Pelosi can't secure the votes, Clyburn and Hoyer could go head-to-head for the top spot. And should Pelosi somehow fall short, creating the opening for Hoyer and Clyburn, there's a very real chance a third member jumps in, someone who doesn't have to sell themselves as a bridge to a new generation, but who is the new generation. Why kick Pelosi to see another 80-year-old replace her. The names circulating include Jeffries, Representative Karen Bass, a Democrat from California, Sherry Bustos, a Democrat from Illinois, and Cedric Richmond, a Democrat from Louisiana. I haven't ruled anything in. I haven't ruled anything out, Jeffries said, about running for the spot in the party leadership. Speaking to reporters before the August recess, Jeffries said his focus is on winning back the majority. If there ever was a time, it's now to have a member of the Black Caucus as Speaker of the House, said Representative Philemon Villa, Democrat from Texas, one of Pelosi's loudest critics. Game of numbers. My position is I don't give a beep what they do in caucus, Villa said. I'm going to go to the House floor and vote no. Democrats hold 195 seats in the House, 2 of which are vacant due to a death and a resignation. The 2 vacant seats are safe blue districts. If Democrats hold 195 and flip 32 GOP-held districts, they would have a 227-seat majority, which, according to Villa's math, still is enough to make Pelosi's Speaker. I am confident it does not matter what happens in the caucus because there are 11 of us who are going to go to the House floor and vote for someone else, at which point she couldn't get the number she needs on the House floor, said Villa. If Villa's bold prediction plays out, there could be chaos among House Democrats. At the start of every Congress, the Speaker is elected on the chamber floor and needs a majority of the House, or 218 if everyone votes. Republicans are expected to vote for a GOP member only. It would happen like this. Pelosi wins in the caucus, a secret ballot vote that's postponed until December, and then falls just shy of the 218 votes needed in the public vote on the chamber floor in January. It would send Democrats scrambling to find a fix. Few believe Pelosi would ever put herself in that position. She's widely hailed, even by her enemies, as the best vote counter in the generation. To think that she wouldn't know she's short of votes is unfathomable. I'm a numbers person when it comes to counting votes for legislation, she told NPR during the recess. Passing the Affordable Care Act, the Recovery Act, and the list goes on. Wall Street reform and the rest. And I'm a numbers person when it comes to my own possibilities in Congress. Democrats have a 77% chance of winning the House with an average gain of 35 seats, according to the 538's forecast. Still, a blue wave is not assured. Winning just the 23 necessary to flip control is a gargantuan task. If Democrats win the majority by anywhere from 23 to 32 seats, Pelosi could be in danger, especially if the incoming freshman Democrats are those who have publicly said they would oppose her. If Democrats gain 35 or more seats, Pelosi should have plenty of breathing room, depending on the composition of that freshman class. Because for every candidate like West Virginia's Richard Ojeda, I'm not a fan, he said of Pelosi. There's a Katie Hill. Pelosi had got more done than anyone, said Hill, who was running against incumbent Republican Steve Knight in California. I don't see somebody who's in the position or is prepared to jump in and immediately start getting the stuff done that needs to happen. Then there's Pelosi's ability to win over incoming freshmen by dangling attractive committee assignments and reminding them of her fundraising prowess and ability to help with their re-election. Let's not, and I never have, underestimate the staying power of Nancy Pelosi, said former Representative Nick Rahall, a West Virginia Democrat who served for 38 years under 3 Democratic leaders. She is an energetic leader as I have ever seen of our party, a fundraiser like I've never seen. That Democrats are more vocally positioning themselves and crunching the numbers could spell trouble for Pelosi, but if past is prologued, Pelosi will know how many votes she has, and when she has them, it'll be the numbers game, made a bit more complicated by a freshman class that appears ready to shake up the Democratic establishment and demand fast results. The wider the margin, the less that Nancy's leadership is going to be challenged or at risk, said Representative Anthony Brown, a Democrat from Maryland. And I'm confident that we are going to, because people are working hard. We got the great candidates, we're organizing, we're mobilizing, have a pretty sizable margin too. Businesses and conservatives fear that Trump's labor deal with Schumer is a loser. By Sean Higgins. Conservative and pro-business groups are urging the White House to abandon a handshake agreement President Trump struck with Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, to fill an open slot on the National Labor Relations Board, the main federal law enforcement agency. It is a case, they argue, where Schumer may have proven he is better at the art of a deal than Trump. Schumer wants Trump to renominate longtime NLRB member Mark Gaston Pierce, who has served on the board since 2010. Keeping Pierce wouldn't upset the board's current 3-2 GOP majority created by Trump's previous NLRB appointees, so keeping Pierce may seem like a small price to pay if it can get Schumer to play ball on the other White House pick. But in fact, conservatives say keeping Pierce could effectively undo all of Trump's previous picks, leaving the board as if President Obama was still in, a period that the group see as uniquely pro-union and disruptive to the economy. 2 of President Trump's pick for the NLRB, Chairman John Ring and board member William Emanuel, are facing considerable pressure to recuse themselves from a board swath of the board's cases. Should Pierce continue with the board, it could result in major cases being heard by a 2-1 Democratic majority. Pierce would have a vested interest in slowing down any effort to undo the Obama policies. Mark Pierce was behind a lot of the reversals of long-standing presidents during the Obama administration, so there is a lot of concern about him, said Glenn Spencer, Senior Vice President for the Employment Policy at the Chamber of Commerce. Some conservative activists speaking off the record concede their message may not be getting through. Labor and employment issues involve a narrow field of law, often not well understood by Republican lawmakers or others in the GOP. Democrats, on the other hand, being close to the labor movement, better understand it, and thus are able to outmaneuver their opponents on issues relating to it. To the activists, Pierce is one of those cases. Pierce is a man who usually understands the board and knows how to work it, knows how to push the boundaries of its reach, said Matt Patterson, field director of the nonprofit California Policy Center and a conservative activist. The 5-member NLRB is a quasi-independent agency. The board members are appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. It currently has controlling 3-1 GOP majority, with 1 seat open since Pierce's term expired in late August. By tradition, the President picks the majority but allows the opposing party to have the remaining 2 seats. Trump White House officials seeing Pierce as a way to get other nominees through the Senate. It is a standard practice for presidents to nominate members of the other party to independent boards. Lindsey Walters, Deputy White House Press Secretary, told the Washington Examiner. It also is a standard practice for the Senate to confirm executive branch and judicial nominees. We continually urge Senate Democrats to end their obstruction. Schumer's office did not respond to a request for comment. Patterson argues it is the worst trade-off than the administration realizes. There's a reason why Democrats want Pierce to stay on board. They hope that Trump loses in 2020 and that Pierce can become a chairman again. Patterson said, Chuck Schumer knows what he is doing. Pierce, along with other Obama-era appointee, board member and later general counsel Richard Griffin, jointly transformed the board, once considered a sleepy backwater among federal agencies, through an inventive reinterpretation of existing rules and regulations. Griffin stepped down in 2017. Pierce, for example, pushed to have the NLRB weigh in excessively on corporate employee manuals, a move that allowed the board to pursue cases against companies even when there wasn't a union issue involved. He is also considered the architect of the board's decision in Browning versus Ferris, a 2014 case that vastly expanded corporate legal liability by potentially putting companies on the hook for any violations at other businesses they had dealings with, under a doctrine called joint employer. The board, now with a Trump-appointed majority, voted to overrule Browning versus Ferris in a December case called Highbrand. However, the board roughly vacated the decision earlier this year after its Inspector General released a report saying that board member William Emanuel should have recused himself based on ties his former lawyer had to the case. Emanuel has rejected the argument, calling the Office of the Inspector General report absurd. The case has prompted unions and Senate Democrats with a keen interest in labor issues, such as Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts, to call for a stricter standard for recusals at the NLRB for both Emanuel and board chairman John Ring, both of whom worked for prominent management side law firms. The board requires a 2-year cooling-off period before a new member can weigh in on a case involving their former firm. Emanuel was confirmed last September and Ring only in August. Pierce, on the other hand, has served on the board since 2010 and has long passed the point where he could be called to recuse in cases. Thus, there could be in cases where Ring and Emanuel were forced to step aside, and Pierce, should he stay, would form a 2-to-1 Democratic majority among the remaining members. The board operates by simple majority. Landmark Navy drone deal offers Boeing potential for a new defense franchise. By James Langford. Boeing's late summer victory in the bidding war to develop an unmanned fueling tanker for the U.S. Navy offers far more than initial $805 million in revenue. It gives the manufacturer a new aircraft development program that has the potential to become a franchise business, revitalizing a defense unit that relies heavily on the production of older models after losing the lucrative F-35 fighter to Lockheed Martin and the B-21 long-range bomber to Northrop Grumman. It's a big research and development program and a big win within the unmanned system. Roman Schweitzer, an analyst with Cohen Washington Research Group, told the Washington Examiner. Northrop Grumman, General Atomics, and probably Lockheed in the classified realm have been the 800-pound gorillas, and this gives Boeing a big anchor in that business. While the initial agreement, which covers development of 4 MQ-25 Stingray drones that can refuel fighters in mid-flight, is relatively modest, the Navy has projected spending $3.5 billion through 2023, which includes buying prototypes in the 2019 and 2020 budget years, Schweitzer said. The program may ultimately expand to 72 drones at a cost of $14 billion, with less than half that amount devoted to research and development, the Navy said. That would preserve Chicago-based Boeing's competitive advantage in building carrier-borne aircraft for decades. The plane maker's FA-18 Super Hornet and the EA-18 Growler derivative make up the bulk of the Navy's carrier air wing currently, but Lockheed is encroaching with the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the most expensive weapons program in the U.S. history. The first drones are expected to be operational in August of 2024, according to the U.S. Defense Department. Boeing, which intends to do the work in St. Louis, was one of the 3 companies that submitted bids for the project. Its rivals were General Atomics, Lockheed, and initially Northrop. If Lockheed has won the MQ-25, it would have cemented its position as the builder of the next-generation naval aviation platforms, while Boeing would have been regulated to manufacturing fleet warhorses, Schweitzer said. That wasn't Chief Executive Officer Dennis Muhlenberg's vision. Boeing has invested heavily in capturing future franchise programs, he told investors in July. In addition to the Stingray, we are also leveraging capabilities from across the enterprise for a new intercontinental ballistic missile system for the Air Force and the T-X trainer, he said. The T-X is a 2-seat craft for Air Force pilots designed to replace the aging T-38 fleet built by Northrop Grumman from 1961 to 1972, some 500 of which are still in service. The jets have been used to train more than 72,000 Air Force pilots, and Northrop designed a replacement wing to extend the plane's lifespan through at least 2020. As for the Stingray, the Navy wants the drone not only to stretch the combat range of fighters, but also to let carriers launch them further away from targets. The Navy envisions the unmanned aircraft, which will free additional fighters for simultaneous military strikes by curbing refueling delays as a critical component of its force. Service leaders are using an accelerated acquisition program designed to trim 5 to 6 years from the development timeline. We brought industry in very quickly and leveraged the technology that had been developed to date so that we would move quickly to production. Admiral John Richardson, the Chief of Naval Operations, told Republican Senator Roy Blunt during a hearing earlier this year that covered plans for a drone. The Navy conducted the first launch and recovery of an unmanned drone from an aircraft in 2013. 2 years earlier, a service team completed the first landing of an unmanned aircraft on a carrier USS Eisenhower using a modified F-18 that also carried a human pilot. Carrier landings are notoriously challenging since the landing strip is not only moving but considerably smaller. Pilots rely on the tail hook built into jets to snag one of the 4 high-strength retaining wires that halt the aircraft. As a company, we made an investment in both our team and in our unmanned aircraft system that meets the U.S. refueling requirements. Vinay Kuret, the new head of Boeing's defense business, said the award was announced. The fact that we are preparing for the first flight is thanks to an outstanding team who understands the Navy and their need to have this important asset on their carrier decks. Since the drone contract was a fixed-price arrangement that doesn't offer latitude for higher-than-planned expenses, Boeing had an advantage over competitors, Schweitzer noted. Its lucrative commercial aircraft business provides a substantial cushion for aggressive bids for military projects such as the MQ-25, a clean sheet or a unique system tailored to the Navy's needs. While there are risks with such a strategy, Boeing is capable of absorbing them, and its investors generally care far more about the commercial business than the defense units, Weitzer noted. The commercial business, which includes the single-aisle 737, an aviation industry workhorse, and the jumbo 747, accounted for 61% of Boeing's $93.4 billion in revenue last year, when the Defense, Space, and Security unit garnered just $21.1 billion. The Stingray gives it a cutting-edge program that engineers might be able to modify for other U.S. service or foreign militaries, Schweitzer said. It's a big program, he said. It certainly could have a multi-decade implications. Retail industry flourishing as companies brace for impact of new tariffs. By Joe Williams. The U.S. retail industry is flourishing, a rebuke to critics who just a few years ago predicted its demise. But looming threats such as the President Trump's trade skirmishes may weigh on profits in 2019. At least 25 of the top publicly traded stores reported revenue growth for the most recent earnings period, according to a Washington Examiner review of the disclosures. Several, like footwear company DSW Inc., posted double-digit gains. Their successes come amid an economic boom, spurring low unemployment, high consumer sentiment, and a slight increase in wages that may be dampened by interest rate increases from the Federal Reserve, as well as Trump's levies on overseas imports and retaliation from trading partners. The White House is expected to impose tariffs soon on an additional $200 billion in Chinese shipments, including finished goods, a significant blow that several retail leaders say they are preparing for. We're concerned about tariffs because they would increase prices on everyday products for American families, Brian Cornell, Target's chief executive officer, said on the company's recent earnings call. A top executive at the Home Depot, meanwhile, told the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that the building supply chain expects the new tariffs to add nearly $300 million in expenses in 2018. At Dollar Tree, Inc., which is renovating 500 of the Family Dollar stores, Chief Executive Officer Gray Philbin is prepared to grapple with the levies as needed. That may well mean raising prices, he noted. We are and will be active in the process, Philbin said. We will not stand still. Like other shocks to the system, we will do what we have always done to mitigate impact. Overall, however, investors and top executives are optimistic that the U.S. economy can weather the tariff headwinds as a lucrative holiday shopping season approaches. Traffic at big box retailer Target grew 6.4% in the 3 months through June, the most since it had been reporting such data in 2008, and sales climbed 7% to nearly $18 billion. Helping to support those gains were the Minneapolis-based company's investments in online shopping and new offerings like curbside pickup, both of which hone a competitive edge against e-commerce giant Amazon. The company founded by Jeff Bezos topped $1 trillion in the market value earlier this month, and its success has revolutionized the retail sector, forcing many companies to emulate its most successful tactics. The real challenge, however, is capitalizing on the ways in which they differ from Amazon. It's not so much to compete with. You have to be able to differentiate from and be able to drive that, Joe Feldman, Senior Managing Director at the Telsey Advisory Group, told the Washington Examiner. It's where you have a lot of overlap, where it's easy to buy basic apparel or it's easy to buy commodity-oriented goods. That's where you've seen the most pressure in the retail space relative to Amazon. The home improvement sector, by contrast, is one that has performed well against Amazon. Sales at Home Depot, for example, rose 8.4% in the most recent quarter to $30.4 billion. Atlanta-based retail saw a 26% increase in online sales after investments on its delivery capabilities and in-store pickup options. Other retailers are responding to the e-commerce threat by revamping their brick-and-mortar stores to lure shoppers. Tiffany & Company is investing more than $250 million in its Fifth Avenue store in New York, the location most famous by the film Breakfast at Tiffany's. Worldwide sales at the jeweler grew 12% to $1.1 billion in the 3 months through June. Specialty stores like Best Buy are also seeing a resurgence. The consumer electronics giant reduced prices and bolstered its service offerings to better compete against Amazon, a gamble that appears to be paying off. The company posted a 5% increase in revenue to $9.4 billion in the most recent quarter, while some same-store sales, a key metric of success in the industry, grew by 6.2%. Some of the gains, particularly at the apparel stores, are due to higher prices made possible by a strong economy coupled with the supply chain improvements. But those hikes could be short-lived as discount retailers like TJ Maxx look to unload ballooning inventory. According to Nomura Institute analyst Simon Siegel, tariffs could further complicate the picture. Anytime a retailer or brand is faced with increased prices, the main question becomes how much they can pass on to consumers, Siegel said in an interview. Right now, everyone can raise prices. If you're in a healthy environment, you're able to raise prices. If the tariffs add costs, it's a neutralizing factor. Senate faces pressure on long-term FAA reauthorization by Diana Stancy Correll. The Senate is facing mounting pressure from the aviation community to secure long-term legislation extending the